As the series ends, there's a live chat online with the Blue Planet production team at bbc.co.uk/nature. The original music for The Blue Planet is available on BBC CD, and there's a fully illustrated BBC book and video box set to accompany the series.
Okay, so you've had it easy just sitting and watching us. Now it's your turn for a Blue Planet challenge. Your mission? To click on our website and dive beneath the waves. As deep as you dare. You choose how far you go. Then we can really check each other out. The Blue Planet adventure continues at bbc.co.uk/nature. Until now, we've only touched the surface. Take a walk on the wild side. Say, hey, honey, take a walk on the wild side. All right.
From a Time the World Forgot, Walking with Beasts, released November the 15th on BBC One, Interactive Television and the web.
Wanted, mature couple with flat share.
Naughty, sassy girls Linda's enough to make any man's dough rise. Well, not mine!
Must be clean and tidy.
If you smell anything untoward, don't worry. It's just me vanilla surprise. It takes the drip when off.
Get on well with the neighbours.
It's coming! Feel between my legs!
And be available to move to BBC One on Friday night at 9:30. Jimmy, 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 a brand new series, part of the lineup, this Friday night from 8 on BBC One. Staying in is the new going out.
This is BBC One in the Midlands. Now the news at 10 o'clock with Peter Sissons and Suzanne Virdee.
Tough going in the Middle East for Tony Blair's peace mission. He hears Arab anger at the Afghan bombing and contempt for Israel. The diamonds that pay for bin Laden's terror, a special report. Plagued by abandoned cars, new powers to sweep them off the street. Celtic hits 4, but it's not enough to get them into Europe's top 16.
Here in the Midlands tonight, 4 people are killed after a falling tree branch leads to a head-on crash. And angry asylum seekers say they won't go after being told to leave the Midlands.
Good evening. Tony Blair faced the unbending reality of Middle East politics today in his latest mission to shore up support for the coalition against terror. The first British Prime Minister to visit Syria, he found that the Syrians support the campaign against bin Laden's terrorist network, but won't disown Palestinian groups fighting the Israelis, and they condemn the bombing of civilians in Afghanistan. Tonight, Mr. Blair is in Jordan after talks in Saudi Arabia, and he goes on to Israel tomorrow. Our political editor, Andrew Marr, reports from the Saudi capital, Riyadh.
The Prime Minister is on a peace mission. Indeed, Tony Blair seems to regard himself at the moment as a kind of peace missionary, from the damp towns of Northern Ireland to the arid deserts of the Middle East. Here, his hosts are likely to regard him as a kind of American agent, but a more open, friendlier agent, and somebody they are generally very keen to meet. Tony Blair pays court to King Fahd. The Saudi royal family once supported Osama bin Laden and are now critical to the future of the coalition against him. Holding Arab opinion together while the bombing continues is fantastically difficult. The Prime Minister is eating and cajoling for his country in a region now extremely nervous about its future. Earlier, Mr. Blair got a rough reminder of just how angry Arab opinion is about Western support for Israel. Syria's President Assad was a man Mr. Blair said he thought he could do business with, a younger generation reformer, but he regards Palestinian suicide bombers and assassins as freedom fighters.
Resisting occupation is an international right, nobody can deny, and therefore we have many organisations and many people who support the liberation and who support the resistance fighters. An act of resistance is very different from an act of terrorism.
And although he condemned the September the 11th terrorist attack in New York very quickly, he's strongly against the bombing in Afghanistan.
We cannot accept what we see every day on the television screens, the killing of innocent civilians. There are hundreds now who are dying every day.
Tony Blair knows that he's taking a risk even coming here, but the dangers of not trying to move the peace process forward are far, far worse.
It is difficult, because of the history and the differences, to come here, to have a press conference such as this. It is an attempt to find new understanding and a new way forward to resolve the differences that we have. Now, maybe we won't be able to, but let's at least try.
Visiting this 7th century mosque in Damascus, the world's oldest inhabited city, the Prime Minister was lectured on Islam's essentially peaceful nature.
And in destiny, the good and bad is decided by God.
But this city is also host to 10 of the world's most feared Islamist groups, including the one that recently claimed responsibility for the assassination of an Israeli cabinet minister. Mr. Blair's Syrian visit did not go according to plan. Speaking later in Riyadh, he insisted he wasn't embarrassed.
We have to understand that there are different perspectives that people will bring to this situation. But, you know, you can either stay out of the dialogue or get into it and try and build a bridge of understanding for the future.
The Prime Minister is now flying on to Jordan and then to Israel, the heart of the matter. Tomorrow's hosts are the very same people that today's hosts regard as bloody state terrorists. And of course the Israelis think much the same thing about the Syrians, Palestinians and others. This is not proving easy. Tony Blair is sometimes accused of wanting to be all things to all people. Here and now, that's beginning to look like a very useful trait. Andrew Marr, BBC News, Riyadh.
And our Middle East correspondent, Orla Gearin, joins us from Jerusalem. Orla, Tony Blair would like to take the heat out of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Does anyone there believe his visit can actually achieve anything?
I think expectations are very limited, Peter. He's not coming here because the time is right for a major diplomatic initiative. In fact, the moment could hardly be worse. He's coming here because of the coalition and because of the bigger picture. Now, British officials are telling us that he's not bringing any radical new ideas. Instead, he's hoping to inject a bit of life into the old ones. He will be urging people to get back to the table. He will stand shoulder to shoulder with Yasser Arafat and express support for a Palestinian state, and that's something he has done already. And the Israelis are basically seeing him as the most high-level emissary they've had from Washington as an ambassador for George Bush. They really regard this as a kind of a holding visit, an attempt to keep the lid on things, rather than any major bid to encourage the peace process.
How do the Israelis perceive his visit to Syria and Saudi Arabia?
Very sensitive for them, obviously, that he's coming here hot on the heels from a visit to what they regard as an enemy state, a place that gives house room to Palestinian militant groups and gives them an awful lot of support. Now, publicly they're not complaining, and privately Israeli officials are telling us tonight that they are satisfied that the Prime Minister didn't let the Syrians have it all their own way, that he did criticize them for their support of other terror groups. And also the Israelis are saying that they see this really as the politics of the moment. They understand that now it's important for George Bush and Tony Blair to woo the Arab world. And they really just want to hear reassurance from him when he gets here that Israel's security is still very important to them, to Britain and America, and they expect to get that reassurance from him.
Orla Gearin, thank you. Taliban front lines have taken a heavy pounding from American bombers in a day-long bombardment north of the capital, Kabul. The Taliban say 1,500 people have been killed since the US-led bombing missions began this month, but there's no independent confirmation. For the first time, the Taliban have taken foreign journalists to their southern stronghold of Kandahar to show damage they say has been caused to civilian areas by the strikes. Among them was our correspondent Simon Ingram, who sends this report.
As in Vietnam and the Gulf War, so now in Afghanistan. Mighty B-52s carry the fight to the Taliban, carpet bombing their trenches and gun positions north of Kabul. And in the southern city of Kandahar, the Taliban stronghold, we were shown some of the unintended results of the bombardment. These boys were digging through the remains of a row of shops, including a pharmacy and a motorcycle parts depot. Local residents wanted to know why US bombs had targeted them. There's nothing connected to the Taliban around here, this man says. The Americans only want to stop us feeding our families. In point of fact, a heavily damaged Taliban ministry building stood nearby. Evidence like this may be less than wholly convincing, and the Americans could well dismiss it as propaganda. But what's harder to deny is that the anger felt by people here seems to be directed not at the Taliban, but at the United States. And the Taliban, on this evidence, are very much in control, at least here in their shattered backyard. Despite the pounding they're taking, these fighters seem in good spirits, playful in a menacing sort of way with us, their foreign guests. And among senior officials like the foreign minister, there's no panic, more a strange mood of confidence. The Taliban aren't running, Mr. Mutawakkil told us. The Americans should come down and fight us on the ground. Then they'd see who'd run. Throughout this trip, our passports, like our personal safety, are firmly in the hands of our hosts. We might be representatives of an aggressive foreign power, but we remain to them guests worthy of respect. Tonight, Kandahar and its bewildered inhabitants are bracing themselves for yet another night of bombing. To a visitor, what seems most astonishing is the stoicism of its people. Whenever peace does return here, for them it can't come soon enough. Simon Ingram, BBC News, Kandahar.
There's more concern over the anthrax threat in America tonight after a woman died of the infection who was not thought to have come into contact with the existing tainted letters. The death of the New York hospital worker, the fourth fatal case so far, raised new worries that other letters may be contaminated or that the spores are reaching people by other means.
Another anthrax emergency, this one deeply disturbing to federal investigators. Biohazard teams now focused on New York. This the home of 61-year-old Kathy Nguyen, who died this morning of inhalation anthrax. She worked in a New York hospital, but not in the mailroom. No one knows how she got anthrax, which is why the police are desperate to trace her recent movement.
So far, we have not been able to trace this back to any specific thing that leads us to her contact with anthrax.
Thousands of recent patients and employees from Nguyen's hospital are now being tested. Suddenly, no one seems safe.
The reality of it is this is a much more difficult investigation. It doesn't mean it can't be done. It just means it's going to take a while longer.
So far, the focus has been on postal facilities, but now it seems anthrax spores can rub off pieces of mail and float in the air more easily than imagined. The authorities here are scrambling to keep up with the anthrax threat. Cross-contamination, it seems, is more of a danger than the experts ever thought. And all of this at a time when Americans have been warned that another terrorist attack may be imminent. And with that in mind, the U.S. government today announced a new effort to track terrorists trying to enter the country. Immigration and intelligence agents will work together.
We will detain, prosecute, deport terrorist aliens who are already inside the nation's borders. America will not allow terrorists to use our hospitality as a weapon against us.
Tonight is Halloween. In Washington, some parents nervous about the terrorist threat brought their kids out early to a safe daylight trick-or-treat party.
No, I'm not going to let them out my sight because they're not going trick-or-treat. They're going to be right here with me, and we're going to stay home and eat candy at home.
Despite appearances, many Americans feel the same way. Life is more unsettling, less sweet this Halloween. Stephen Sacker, BBC News, Washington.
The 10 o'clock news has uncovered new evidence showing how Osama bin Laden has funded his al-Qaeda terrorist network. He's used frontmen to invest in diamonds, which were mined in the war-torn Congo in Africa. And by buying shares in otherwise legitimate companies, bin Laden's associates came close to owning a company listed on the world's biggest financial market, the London Stock Exchange. David Schuckman has been uncovering the bin Laden diamond trail.
It doesn't look that impressive, but from the dust and poverty of Khartoum, capital of Sudan, Osama bin Laden spawned a global business network. It stretches around the world, even reaching the heart of the city of London. Intelligence sources have revealed how the bin Laden web touched this financial centre. The world's most wanted man may be fighting the West, but he's very good at tapping into its wealth. Only last year, the city of London was a financial target for Osama bin Laden. We've known for some time that he's used perfectly legal companies to fund his terrorism. Now we've discovered that he came frighteningly close to gaining a foothold here through a company on the stock exchange. Its business was diamonds. Bin Laden's diamond trail has taken a lot of unpicking. It starts in Khartoum, his base in the 90s. He had interests in many companies there. One was Taba Investments. Through this company, he bought his way into the huge diamond fields of the Congo and one lucrative diamond mine owned by Oryx Natural Resources. Company directors may never have realized, but among the shareholders were frontmen for bin Laden. Diamonds have long been a curse on the Congo, the source of conflict for decades. Yet the company Oryx had ambitious plans. It tried to merge with another company, Petra, that's listed on the London Stock Exchange. Bin Laden's men were set to become London shareholders till the deal was blocked.
Diamonds from conflict zones are so small, yet so valuable and so transportable as a form of currency, hard currency, that he can move them around the world. He can have a stake in businesses, money launder, all along the side, and his tentacles reach right around. It's very difficult for us to pinpoint them and cut them off.
The bombing of 2 American embassies in Africa 3 years ago may well have been financed by diamonds. 2 weeks ago, a man known as Mohammed Halfan was jailed for making the bombs. But look at the list of shareholders in the diamond company, and you see someone with a very similar name. Were they the same man?
Zimbabwe.
We turn to someone who's investigated the diamond trade for the UN Security Council. Brian Johnson Thomas obtained proof that the bomber and the shareholder are one and the same.
The real breakthrough is because Western intelligence services now are confirming our story, which is that Khalfan, the man who's been convicted of a heinous terrorist crime and is therefore a dyed-in-the-wool member of Al-Qaeda, is also the same person who has been deeply involved in moving money for Al-Qaeda from the diamond trade.
For the authorities like the FBI, trying to unravel these links is a massive task. Some sources of finance have been frozen, but investigators say much of bin Laden's money may remain beyond reach.
It will be impossible to stop it. But what you have to do is to realize this is not a short-term battle. This is a battle that will not be won in a day, in a year, or in a decade.
Tracking down bin Laden's diamonds won't be easy, but it could be that the financial campaign against him brings quicker results than the military one. David Schuckman, BBC News.
Bulletproof doors are to be fitted on all British Airways and Virgin Atlantic planes to protect their pilots from hijackings and to try to restore passenger confidence. But the extra security measures have been criticised by pilots who claim the new doors are ill-considered and could even be dangerous. Our transport correspondent Simon Montague reports.
Inside a jumbo jet at Heathrow, British Airways is fitting the doors with the locks which should protect the pilots from any dangerous passengers.
This is the first plane to be fitted with the new doors, and once it's closed, British Airways says it will be impossible to get through from this side. In fact, it's only the pilots inside the cockpit who would be able to operate the locks.
BA showed off its reinforced door in a hurry. In the battle to win back passengers, it wanted to undermine rival Virgin's plan to be first to demonstrate the extra security of a bullet, heat and shockproof door.
Security is costing some millions of pounds. Having said that, people's lack of confidence in flying is costing us tens of millions of pounds. So, you know, so as far as we're concerned, it's a good investment.
tests on armoured cockpit doors in America look impressive, but pilots say doors with deadlocks that they can't operate from their seats are ill-considered, ill-conceived and potentially dangerous.
We need to have more thought about this, we need to look at it in detail, and rather than go for instant reactions to, as it were, satisfy public perception, think it all through, discuss it out and get it right.
At Heathrow, travellers reflected on the dilemma of whether a locked, reinforced door between pilots and passengers is a good idea.
I think it's an excellent idea in view of the recent events in New York. I can't see anything wrong with it at all.
What will the pilot do if the passengers are threatened? Is he just going to carry on flying and land a plane that's full of slaughtered people?
The airlines want to reassure passengers, but pilots say locked doors will reduce safety if there's a problem in the cockpit. Simon Montague, BBC News, Heathrow.
3 men who were behind a multi-million-pound fraud which conned 100,000 people across Britain have been jailed at Stafford Crown Court. Sean Smith and Craig Bradley were each jailed for 5 years for organising a bogus homeworking scheme in which people put together basic products at home. But the finished work was always rejected and they received no payment. A third man was jailed for 2 years for his part in the scheme. The travel agent Thomas Cook has confirmed it's cutting 1,500 jobs in the UK. The German-owned business said last week that it wanted to cut 10,000 jobs worldwide. It's also asking its remaining staff to take a pay cut of up to 10%. The chief executive of British Telecom, Sir Peter Bonfield, is to leave the company in January, a year earlier than planned. Sir Peter will receive a payoff of at least £1.5 million. BT, whose share value has collapsed in recent months, say they're unsure who'll replace him. The government's to force farmers to cooperate with livestock culls during future outbreaks of disease. Ministers say their efforts to control the recent foot and mouth outbreak were hampered by legal challenges, which delayed some culls and allowed the disease to spread. Some farmers have reacted furiously to the charges.
In many areas of the country, slaughter was hugely unpopular. There were around 100 legal challenges to culling, and ministers, backed by many scientists, believe that slowed down the fight against the disease.
The key issue is that if you are going to use a culling policy as a stamping out policy, you've got to be quick with it, you've got to be effective with it. These measures means that we can do that.
It is also proposed that compensation payouts should be cut by a quarter if it's found the disease was able to spread because farmers failed to take adequate precautions. Some lawyers say this is legislation that takes away basic rights.
What the government is proposing is a system of getting warrants from a magistrate's court. I do not think this legislation is going to stop legal challenges or people exercising their right to go to law.
This week, an official report into the way the crisis was handled in Devon was highly critical of what it described as the insensitive way officials carried out culls. In this county, many farmers fought the slaughter policy, and they say they would again.
We had excellent legal advice, and I shall seek legal advice of the same stature again in order to be able to defy a cull if it was to come about again. Heaven help us if it does.
It is exactly a month since the last confirmed case of foot and mouth. And ministers here at the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs are trying to learn the lessons of this crisis. But many farmers continue to push for a full public inquiry. They say that is the way to establish where mistakes were made. That would provide a basis for legislation. Richard Wilson, BBC News, Central London.
Abandoned cars, the plague of many residential areas, could be removed from the streets within 24 hours under tough new rules. Last year, 350,000 vehicles were dumped, and the problem's been getting worse because of a slump in the price of scrap metal.
Some days, residents can see their street blighted by 30 dumped cars. As soon as one old banger's towed away, another takes its place. In this London borough, more than 4,000 cars have been abandoned this year.
Just looking around, it's a major problem, and it's a huge worry for the local residents as well, because of the risk of fire, vandalism and so on. And also, it's creating a traffic hazard.
It's mainly due to a collapse in the price of scrap metal. You used to get paid for your old car. Now you mostly have to pay to get rid of it. Throughout Britain, 1,000 cars a day are dumped. The number abandoned in London is estimated to be at least 50,000 a year. Birmingham alone had more than 10,000 last year, while Edinburgh recorded 2,000. And some calculate the total cost to local councils to be £10 million. Although the aim now is to ensure dumped cars are removed quickly, the concern is that it'll cost more.
With the increased expectation that cars are going to be moved within 24 hours, it's going to be cost implications. Unfortunately, that's going to go down to local residents to pay for it.
There'll also be new powers to track down and prosecute owners who don't dispose of their vehicles responsibly.
If you've got the correct registration documents for your old vehicle, the one you want scrapped, bring it here and they'll dispose of it free of charge. They'll get rid of all the pollutants, the hazardous materials, and then send it off to the shredder, where it'll be cut up into tiny pieces for recycling at steelworks around the world.
But with the profit from scrap all but gone, these sort of schemes are rare, and today's measures will take time and money before they begin to eradicate these blots on the landscape. Nicola Carslaw, BBC News.
A special ceremony was held in the Belgian city of Ypres today to mark the 25,000th sounding of the last post. The traditional salute has been played every day at the Menin Gate since 1928 to commemorate the hundreds of thousands of members of the British and Empire Armed Forces who died in Flanders during the First World War. The Duke of Edinburgh was among those present for today's salute. And now tonight's football. The Scottish champions Celtic are out of the Champions League, despite beating the Italian giants Juventus. In a dramatic match, Martin O'Neill's side won 4-3, but because the other match in their group was won by Porto, it's the Portuguese side which goes through.
Celtic had to win tonight for even a chance of staying in the Champions League. On Halloween night, the fans brought hubble and bubble to lift the team. The toil and trouble, though, came first from Juventus. After winning himself a free kick, Alessandro Del Piero cast a spell of his own.
It's a good one! Oh, it's magical!
Celtic's response was to attack at every turn. Moravcik played the midfield wizard, conjuring up a goal for Jos Valgaeren.
Looking for Valgaeren!
Moments before half-time, Moravcik delivered again. This time, Chris Sutton put Celtic ahead.
Sutton trying to get there!
For the second half, Juventus brought on a magician of their own. It took David Trezeguet. A generous penalty decision gave Larsson the chance to regain the lead for Celtic before Sutton's brilliant strike left the fans praying for a favourable result in Portugal. It wasn't to be, though. This was a night of glorious failure. Manchester United have already qualified, so in Lille they fielded a weakened side, just 10 internationals. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer scored a showtime goal to take the lead. In the second half, Lille fought back to claim a draw. The next chapter of the Champions League can now begin. David Eaves, BBC News.
It's 25.5 minutes past 10. I'll be back a little later with an update on the day's headlines, but now we join our news teams across the United Kingdom.
Good evening, I'm Suzanne Virdee. Police are tonight investigating whether a fallen branch caused a road accident in which 4 people died and 1 man was injured. The head-on crash between a van and a car happened on the A5 in Staffordshire earlier today as drivers were travelling to work. Sharon Stokes reports.
Workmen were removing branches from the tree for most of the day. It was about 5:30 this morning that a man from South Staffordshire driving this Leyland van hit a large branch. He was heading along the A5 towards Telford. It was just outside Weston under Lizard that police believe he hit the branch which had fallen from an overhanging oak tree. This car was travelling in the opposite direction when the vehicles collided head-on. The occupants, 3 men and a woman, were confirmed dead at the scene. Police are still in the process of notifying their families.
We have unfortunately had a serious loss of life at this incident, but we're still making inquiries, and anyone that's seen anything which would be of help, we'd be obliged if they contact us.
The driver of the Leyland van, which was travelling towards Telford, has been taken to the Princess Royal Hospital. His injuries are not thought to be life-threatening. The road was closed for 5 hours while the wreckage was cleared. It's still unclear who's responsible for the tree. 2 years ago, a diseased tree fell across a road in Birmingham, killing 3 people. The Health and Safety Executive is currently prosecuting Birmingham City Council over that incident. Tonight, police are investigating who was responsible for the tree's maintenance in the light of today's tragic events.
A man's become the first person to be banned from parts of Birmingham city centre for aggressive begging. Curtis Braxton, who's 37 and from the Newtown area of Birmingham, was served with an antisocial behaviour order after repeated complaints about his begging. He's now been banned from entering Paradise Forum, Centenary Square and Victoria Square for the next 5 years. MG Rover has agreed to withdraw adverts for its new sporting Z range of cars over concerns that they could encourage speeding. The Advertising Standards Authority upheld the decision even though it received only 1 complaint. The campaign carried the messages, the full-fat, high-caffeine, maximum-strength MG and life's too short not to. Asylum seekers today staged a sit-in at offices in Birmingham after being told they must leave the Midlands and return to accommodation in Scotland and the North East. They say they're frightened to go back after a fellow asylum seeker was murdered in a race-hate attack in Glasgow. Colin Pemberton has been looking at their plight.
Around 60 asylum seekers gathered in protest at the Midland headquarters of the Refugee Council in Digbeth in Birmingham. About 40 went inside and occupied offices. 2 men were arrested. They've been told they have to return to the north of England and Scotland, where they'd lived before moving to Birmingham to escape what they claim was racial harassment. They're disappointed at their treatment.
Just like a potato, to put it into a packet and put it in, to throw it somewhere and then somewhere else. Yeah. We are not human. They don't treat us as a human being. Yeah.
Too much stress in my country and again more stress in this country.
Their plight is because of a row over who funds their accommodation. Tonight, the National Asylum Support Service said they would be rehoused by Friday, many in the Birmingham area. But those whose original home elsewhere is still available will have to return there.
The Coventry MP and former Paymaster General Geoffrey Robinson has been forced to apologise to fellow MPs. He was found to have failed to give accurate answers to the Commons sleaze watchdog about his business dealings. He's now been suspended from the Commons for 3 weeks.
I apologise to the House for these oversights and I accept absolutely the committee's recommendations. I want the House to know that I do sincerely mean that.
A bill to force airlines to fund research into deep vein thrombosis, so-called economy class syndrome, has been introduced in the House of Commons. The Stafford MP, David Kidney, said he was prompted to act after a constituent felt seriously ill. Here's our political editor, Patrick Burns.
We went into the jungle to see.
Joining me in the BBC's Westminster studios, Nick and Ruth Barmforth count themselves fortunate to be able to reminisce over snaps from their holiday in Goa near India last January. They're convinced the long flight home almost cost Nick his life. Shortly after returning to Stafford, he collapsed twice and needed 2.5 weeks in hospital to begin his recovery from deep vein thrombosis, potentially lethal clotting of the blood.
The symptoms that I was displaying certainly created the link in the minds of the medical authorities that I dealt with there. They were very quick to establish the fact that those very symptoms were the kind of symptoms associated with long-haul travel.
I'm very fortunate. I'm not sitting here a widow. I could have been. And I want to make sure that people out there also are not going to be widowed or bereaved when they could do something about it.
Mr. and Mrs. Barmforth were watching as Stafford's MP, David Kidney, introduced his bill to force airlines to advise passengers who may be at risk and to help fund research to establish if thrombosis is caused by flying itself or just by the prolonged confinement. This week, British Airways and Virgin Atlantic heard they face legal action on behalf of the families of people who've died after long-range flights. Test cases which could open the floodgates for over 200 more people to claim an estimated total of £10 million compensation.
Sport now, and football in nationwide Division 1. Coventry City drew 2-2 at home with Preston North End. Wolves remain top of the table with a 1-0 victory over Millwall, and West Bromwich Albion won 1-0 away at Crystal Palace. Well, that's it from us. Now back to Peter Sissons in London. Bye-bye.
And the main news again. The Prime Minister's arrived in Jordan tonight on the latest leg of his peace mission in the Middle East. Earlier, he had talks in Saudi Arabia and in Syria, where he was told of Arab anger at the deaths of civilians in Afghanistan. And in America, a fourth person has died of the inhaled form of anthrax. Newsnight starting now over on BBC Two has an interview with American Deputy Defense Secretary Paul Wolfowitz, but from the 10 o'clock news, good night.
Good evening to you. We promised you it probably would be, and now I can tell you it definitely was. In other words, it was the warmest October on record in central parts of England, and those records go way back to 1659, almost just about before my time. It was also, of course, pretty wet. We had to pay for it 1.5 times the average. Now, I'm going to fill you full of statistics. Cast your mind back, for instance, to yesterday. We saw temperatures of 20 degrees in many parts of the country. Today, of course, it turned a lot cooler. We had a fresh northwesterly wind, and those temperatures pulled back some 5 or 6 degrees, 13 or 14 degrees in most parts of the country. And actually, that's the sort of figure that one should expect at this time of the year. 13 or 14 degrees, maybe a bit lower in the north. These sort of figures are what we're going to get for the first few days of November. We had these chilly northwesterly winds with us today. We're going to find that the weather more or less splits into two halves. The north stays windy, although the winds, at least to begin with, coming from the southwest or the west, so not particularly chilly. The south, the winds are lighter, and that means to say we're going to find some frost and fog. And we could well find quite a cold snap starting when we move into next week, but that's a long way off, and we'll have to obviously update you on that nearer the time. So that band of rain moved away during the night. It pulled down some showers across the north, and now we're seeing some more general cloud gathering in the northwest, and that's going to bring along some outbreaks of rain, chiefly to that northern western part of Scotland during the course of the night, but it could be a few spots as far south as Northern Ireland and northernmost parts of England. But for most of England and Wales, with clearing skies, there will be just 1 or 2 patches of mist and fog, but the main thing is it's going to be much colder than the sort of nights we've been used to, 3 or 4 degrees and some ground frost. So tomorrow may well start off a little bit on the misty side through England and Wales. That'll clear away fairly readily. Then it should be dry just about everywhere with some sunshine, probably the best of the sunshine in the south. More in the way of cloud across Northern Ireland and Scotland. Outbreaks of rain too, chiefly in northwestern parts, but even that I think should become light and patchy as the day wears on. A bit of brightness or even sunshine breaking through in some of those sheltered eastern areas, and we've seen the temperatures about 14 degrees or so. A little bit warmer though, or feeling a little bit warmer with the lighter winds. Now that particular front will move southwards during the course of Friday and into the weekend. It'll bring some outbreaks of mostly light and patchy rain into Scotland and Northern Ireland Friday. Further south we start off with some fog and frost, clearing to give some hazy sunshine. That front giving a few spots of rain across northern parts of England into Saturday. Otherwise it's a fine day.
Just before Band of Brothers, here are tonight's lottery results. In the National Lottery draw, the 6 winning numbers are confirmed as 4, 5, 6, 18, 36 and 49. And the bonus number is 13. Early indications show there is one lucky jackpot winner winning just over £3.6 million. The winning numbers in the Lottery Extra draw are 12, 16, 23, 31, 35 and 49. Initial reports show there are no winners tonight, which means the Lottery Extra jackpot for the next draw has grown to an estimated £13 million.
Peter Pascoe. He's a smart lad.
I was wondering if you fancied a drink with me.
With a gentle touch.
I've been seeing someone. Would you mind keeping it under your hat? I was waiting to talk to Andy. Andy DL, who's as blunt as a truncheon.
What I really don't need is a load of ignorant country plods in welly boots kicking up trouble from me.
Oh, Mums, I reckon. Either that or she fancies me.
Get a grip, Andy. She had a serious point to make.
Take the rough with the smooth.
DL and Pascoe.
Monday at 8:30 on BBC One.
Now on BBC One, in an episode specially directed by Tom Hanks and containing violent scenes, the drama continues in Band of Brothers.
This here is Carwell Tim, the new